So, what's up, everybody? So, the topic of my talk today is Trotskyism. I know some of you guys are sitting here thinking, dude, what do these crazy Marxists think we care about some random trend from like the 20th century, right? It was born in 1917 and it died like after the Second World War. What do we care, man? Well, the reality is that you can trace practically every single living political trend, so to speak, to the theoretical mistakes of Trotsky. So I think it would be a very huge mistake to skip over that. I mean, look at the neocons and then the DSA, the people masquerading, pretending to be socialists, and the people in our government. You know, they're traced to people like Max Shachtman, Irving Kristol, and Irving Howe. All of them came from where? The Socialist Workers' Party. What party was that? The Fourth International. Who ran that? Leon Trotsky. The Libertarians, you know, they were the weapons of the neocons as they came to power with the Reagan Revolution. And when the militia movement happened with the Obama administration, guess who one of the major leaders of the military movement was? It was a guy by the name of Brian Vanderboom. And who's he on record? Where does he come from? Oh, the Socialist Workers' Party. Oh, what a surprise. So I think we need to take a step back, and we're just going to define Trotskyism real quick. Trotskyism is Marxism without the science of Marxism, right? It is Marxism that is like taking for granted all the bourgeois idealist conceptions that we already have about the world. Okay, so now I've given a definition that requires another definition. So we're going to need to explain what idealism and what bourgeois thought is in the first place. And I don't think it's really explained the best by Marx or Engels. My favorite definition actually comes from a German idealist by the name of Arthur Schopenhauer. And what he says is, you have to think of idealism versus materialism as the difference between a musician and a sculptor. He says that a musician is the most idealist form of artist. Why? Well, when I hear a B flat, right? Well, I'm making sense of that relationally, right? I think of B flat as one semitone away from a B, or two semitones away from an A sharp, an A. I'm sorry. Been a while since I've been in school for music, and that's how I'm making sense of it. I hear the tones, right, and then the relationship between them. That's how I make sense of the music. I'm not thinking of a picture, that, for example, where I look at it and then I'm like, oh, okay, that looks like this, which then I make sense of through the relationship. It's just the relationship of the musical notes to each other in the abstract, right? And that's what Plato said about idealism too. He said that math proves idealism, right? Because when I think of a number, I think, well, 4. 4 is 2 away from 2 and 3 away from 1, and so I can make sense of the world in that way. Well, a sculptor is materialist because when you look at a sculpture, right, I see that sculpture and I think, oh, that kind of looks like a man, and I know from my reading of the Renaissance that this is supposed to be this is supposed to be David, and that's a story from the Bible, and then I start to make sense of it based on something that I've seen, right? It goes from sight to thought. It proceeds in that manner. But what does Marx have to say about this? I know I just gave like this crazy abstract definition. What does Marx have to say about this? Well, the best definition that I've thought of, that I think comes from, and the problem with idealist thinking, it comes from capital, right? So let's think about exchange for a second. When we think about exchange, we can use an equation. That's why I need the whiteboard, right? So when we are taking our goods to the market, we can use the equation C to M to C, right? That's the traditional way we're taught to think about exchange, right? In other words, I have a commodity. I have something I want to sell. I have my labor. So I take it to the market and I exchange it for money. It's transformed into money, which I then use to buy another commodity. Okay, well here I've started with something objective, something physical, and then I've transformed it into this idea, money, right? Because money's not a real thing. It just represents the value of this. And then I transform it into this, another commodity. Well, Engels says, hold on a minute. The entire thing facilitating this exchange is the ideal. And so he says under capitalism, this equation makes no sense. So in the era of industrial capitalism, we can begin to think of our equation like this. M, C, M, One. In other words, I take the money that I already have. Right? I have money. I'm taking for granted that I have money. Then I invest that money in an enterprise, and through the labor and goods, it's transformed into a commodity that I take to a market, and I sell at a profit. This represents more money. Well, what have we done here? What's the only part of this equation that's actually supposed to matter? It's the commodity, stupid. It's the part that is actually giving us real value. This is only a representation of value in the abstract. And so when we take this economy and we say only the abstract part matters, well, why should we be curious when industrial capital develops into imperialism, and with the dominance of these giant monopolist financiers based in banking, they look at this equation and they said, well, this part's the only part that matters. This is all I care about. Why am I investing in this? Why don't we go M, M, M? I take my money, I invest it in some more money, and I make money off of it. Brilliant!
Genius!
So that is precisely what idealism is. Well, hold on, let me think for a second.
You're mad.
So now that we have this idea of what idealism is, let's get into what we're actually supposed to be talking about here. I'm sorry. It's supposed to be about Trotsky, right? So who is Leon Trotsky? He's a leader of Russian socialism during the Second International in the lead up to the October Revolution. So as a young boy, he's born in a village called Yanovka. It's in Ukraine. And he's Jewish, right? And he grows up around all these peasants, and they discriminate against him. They don't let his father buy more land because he was already a wealthy peasant, but he's not allowed to buy any more. And he's not allowed to get into the schools that he wants to, and he's discriminated against. And obviously that's horrible. And so this drives him while he's in college. He becomes a Marxist, and he starts to sell pamphlets and newspapers on the street. And this gets him in a little bit of trouble with the Russian secret police at the time. He goes into exile. And in 1904, he's in London at the Second Party Congress. And that's where the Bolsheviks famously split from the Mensheviks. And what does Trotsky do? He's given the opportunity by Lenin. He's asked by Lenin, we'd like to form a coalition. We know we disagree, but hey, this is according to Trotsky. And he says, kick rocks. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Mensheviks. I'm going to be the inside man, and I'm going to convince them. I'm going to convince them for my idea of permanent revolution. It's the most revolutionary revolution you can have a revolution. And he basically, he says in his autobiography, he claims, well, I wasn't really ready to dedicate myself to Marxism in the way Lenin would have wanted me to, and so that's why I didn't join the Bolsheviks. It's a bunch of crap. What actually happened was he hated the peasants because he had been discriminated against by them, and he basically wanted to cut them out of the equation. He said, despite the fact that they are the majority of the population, I'm not dealing with them. So on the eve of revolution, in August of 1917, he comes back to Russia. And this time it's pretty clear who's going to be taking power. It's the people who actually have the roots among the population. That's the Bolsheviks. And Trotsky looks at this and he says, well, I'm kind of screwed, so I'm one of you guys now. And he gets named head of the Petrograd Soviet, and they need allies, so they let him join. Okay, fast forward, 1924. Lenin dies, and there's a struggle amongst the inner party for power. In the center, you have Stalin, and Stalin says, we need to have socialism in one country. What we're going to do is we're going to partner with the peasantry, and we're going to build up our economy, we're going to build socialism, and we're going to thwart the imperialists, we're going to beat them at their own game, we're going to be better at industrializing than the imperialists could ever dream.
Ever.
Then you have the right opposition, right? And that's people like Bukharin. And they say, well, Lenin has this thing called the New Economic Policy, and we're getting pretty comfy with it, and why don't we just do that forever? And because obviously the peasants are backwards and stupid and we don't want to deal with them, so we'll just wait for them to be proletarianized and we'll develop into capitalism, and then we can have socialism. And Trotsky, he takes the left opposition. And what does he say? He says, well, obviously the peasants are backwards and stupid and I hate them and I would never work with them. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to industrialize, yes, but at the expense of the peasantry, we're going to mobilize into this massive military unit, and we're going to march the revolution just like Napoleon did across Europe, and then we'll have socialism because only the Europeans can have socialism. Okay, so what's wrong with this thinking? Beyond the obvious that it makes no sense, we're going to have to get a little bit scientific with this. And to do that, we're going to have to explain... I'm sorry. We're going to have to explain Hegel's concept of the infinity. This is getting a little out there.
That's great.
We're going to get into Hegel's conception of infinity. Okay. So what is the traditional way we think about infinity? Well, traditionally we think of it like numbers on a number line. That's how Aristotle describes it, right? There's additive infinity and there's divisive infinity, right? I start at 0 and I can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc. into infinity. Or I can take, any number and I can divide it into 1/2, into 1/3, into 1/4, into 1/4, into infinity forever. Well, Hegel looks at this and he says, you're missing something. Because he says, all you've done is you've taken the problem, which is the fact that you can only make sense of infinity in the concept of the finite. All you've done is you've taken this finite expression, you're counting, and you've said, it goes on forever. So you haven't said anything about the actual nature of infinity. You haven't said anything. He said you're blabbing, you haven't said nothing. He says if you really want to express infinity, infinity is expressed in the whole of being. Let me bring up a calculator real quick because I'm bad at math. Right, he says, and the example he gives is a fraction, right? He says, I can express 1/7 like that, right? I can express it like that, or if I wanted to get technical, I could, because this is just an approximation, I can turn it into a decimal. I can go 0.1428571, etc. It goes on towards infinity. And he says that's different from this kind of infinity. Why is it different from this kind of infinity? Because it's not just going onwards towards infinity. What I'm doing is, I have this thing, and in the process of developing my understanding of it, I'm zooming more and more in, and I'm discovering more about it. And the exactness is something I could never comprehend, but I just keep going because that's the human experience. That's infinite. I need to discover more and more about the people. Okay, so how does this relate to communism? Why am I talking about math? Well, you need to look at Marx's critique of the French Revolution. What does Engels say in Socialism and Utopian and Scientific? They recognized no external power. Everything had to justify itself before the seat of reason or risk abolition, right? He's saying the people of the French Revolution, they had this attitude of the old ways are backwards and wrong, and we're just going to abolish everything. And that's what we traditionally think of as revolutionary thought. Well, Marx and Engels are looking at this, and they're saying, well, that can't be right. Why are you people going crazy? Well, the answer is that you are just trying to make sense of your revolution in the context of its opposite, of what you're trying to get rid of. And that's no way to make a revolution, because all you can ever do is play this endless game of, well, this relates to that, which relates to that, which relates to that. It's the same problem as the problem we explained with capitalism, where it's this just abstract thing, and it's the same thing as this false infinity, where I'm just relating to this abstract concept. He says that's all wrong. What you really need to be doing is going to the real movement and looking at it as it develops. Communism is the real movement. Communism is this fraction. Communism is a process of us discovering what socialism means in the first place. And that's why Stalin is right over Trotsky. What Trotsky is doing is he's saying, I am looking at the Russian people. I look at them, I hate them, I think they're backwards, I think they're stupid, and what I'm going to do is, because I'm so smart and revolutionary, I'm just going to progress them infinitely towards infinity. Well, what he's actually doing is not progressing them. All he's doing is getting rid of them. He's not saying anything. What is Stalin saying? Stalin is saying, I look at the Russian people as they are. I look at them as they are, and I want them to develop themselves. I want them to develop a spirit, a revolutionary spirit of their own, all on their own. And through the process of building socialism, we will discover what that means. It's not what Marx said it's going to be. It is in the process of building socialism, in the process of empowering the people to fight for their rights, to build up their economy, to build up their country. That is socialism. And that's what the CPI is all about. Thank you. I hope I didn't get too esoteric for y'all, but okay, sorry.